What really happened in a medieval battle? Not the movie version, the real one. No slow-motion sword fights, no perfect armor, no heroic music, just the truth as it was. If you've ever been curious about what it was actually like, it's time to find out. For starters, if you were an average soldier, you probably couldn't even hear the signal to attack. The guy with the horn, he was usually somewhere safe, far from the actual fighting. Smart move on his part. Medieval horn players had the highest life expectancy in the army, right? Behind the kings who started the wars. In the first 15 seconds of battle, nearly half the front line would trip on their own feet, or their comrades. Medieval battlefields weren't neat parade grounds. They were muddy fields with hidden routes, waiting to send you face first into the dirt. Nothing says being a fearsome warrior didn't feel quite like the stories made it seem. It felt more like falling flat on your face while screaming, "Ah, my ankle!" You didn't charge forward like the heroes in legends. Instead, you shuffled ahead in a nervous, clumsy mass, knees weak from hours of standing in rigid formation. The man beside you breathed heavily, stinking of garlic and raw fear. Medieval breath mints weren't a thing. Maybe that's why everyone yelled so much. Shouting was the only way to breathe without tasting your comrade's lunch. The noise was constant, a chaotic chorus where no one knew what they were actually yelling. Most men screamed just to keep from breaking down. Studies show that about 70% of men in combat make involuntary noises they don't even recall afterward. If we translated most of those medieval battle cries, they'd probably sound something like, "Mom, help! I regret everything." Then it happened. The first impact. Someone slammed hard into your shield. Your ears rang, though you weren't sure if it was from the blow or from the man who had just headbutted you. The battlefield was deafening. Not the grand, heroic music of movies, but a brutal wall of grunts, shrieks, and the horrible clang of metal meeting metal or flesh. Your arm vibrated violently from blocking that hit. It shook so badly, you joked in your head that your grandchildren would be born with the tremors. 2 minutes into the chaos, your masterful battle plan had been reduced to a single, desperate goal. Stay upright. Falling meant certain death, trampled beneath the weight of panicked men and merciless boots. The ground was slick with blood and vomit. Your arms ached from holding your shield, and above all the sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving. It felt like you were being cooked inside your padded gambeson. Medieval armor was like carrying around a hot, uncomfortable sauna. It was the only weight loss plan where you could lose either 15 pounds of sweat or your head, whichever happened first. Your whole world shrank to just the space around you. In front of you, you saw the scared eyes of another man. He looked just as lost and confused as you were. In that moment, both of you understood something clearly. Whoever said battle was glorious had clearly never been in one and deserved a special place in hell. And sadly, this was just the beginning. If you were lucky enough to survive the first hit, you now had to deal with what real medieval fighting was like. It didn't look like those fancy sword fights in movies. It was more like a violent rugby game with armor and weapons. People didn't fight one-on-one. If they could, they'd attack you 5 against 1. That wasn't seen as cheating. It was smart. Knights didn't care about some noble code of honor. They only followed one rule. I want to stay alive. The battlefield was so crowded that you could barely move. You had only a few inches to swing your sword. All those big dramatic sword moves you saw in stories, totally impossible here. You were pressed shoulder to shoulder with the other soldiers around you. Most sword fights weren't graceful or skillful. They looked more like you awkwardly poking your sword forward, the way you might try to push someone on a crowded subway. In fact, swords didn't even cause most of the deadly injuries. Studies of old battlefields show that many people died from hits to the top of the head or the neck, usually when someone fell down and others stepped or hit them again and again. Medieval fighting wasn't about fairness. The plan was simple. Knock your enemy down, then hit him while he's down, maybe even a few more times just to be sure. Even the sword's pommel, the heavy metal piece at the end of the handle, was often more useful than the blade itself. Some fighters used a technique called the murder stroke. It's when you hold the blade with both hands and swing the handle like a hammer. It sounds brutal, and it was. And honestly, it might be the most truthful name ever given to a fighting move. Helmets helped save lives, but they also brought new problems. You could barely see through the small slit, and under the hot sun, your head felt like it was baking inside a metal oven. After just 20 minutes of fighting, the inside of a helmet could reach over 100 degrees. A lot of knights didn't die from weapons. They died from overheating. In the end, fighting in medieval times meant surviving inside a burning hot metal suit while everyone around you tried to kill you. That made knights either the bravest people in history or the craziest. In human history, medieval battles were some of the most dangerous places to be. If you fell during the chaos, you had about 2 seconds to get back up. Not because of any rule, but because that's how long it took for boots to start stomping on you, or for weapons to find weak spots in your armor. Experts who studied old battlefields found many bodies lying face, down in just a few inches of mud. They didn't die in some epic way, they simply fell and slowly suffocated. Wounds often came from places you didn't expect. Maybe your armor could stop a sword coming from the front. But what about someone hitting you from the back or side? A regular fighter was attacked from at least 3 directions in a single minute. Your head would spin as you tried to keep track of everything. Kind of ironic, since keeping your head attached was your top priority. Crushing, stomping, and confusion killed more people than skill with the sword ever did. And if you somehow made it out alive and still had all your arms and legs, you had another problem waiting. Flying weapons. The weapons in real medieval battles weren't shiny or fancy, like the ones you see in museums today. Most were rough, heavy tools made to do just one job. Smash through anything between you and your enemy's soft body parts. Take axes, for example. They weren't elegant. They were a lot like wood-cutting tools, just changed a bit to cut through shields. Armor, and sadly, human bones. Their biggest strength? You didn't need to be a trained warrior to use one. Just swing hard. Hit somewhere close, and let physics handle the damage. But there was one big problem. Once your axe dug into something, if your axe got stuck in a wooden shield, or worse, in someone's ribcage, you were in big trouble. Many fighters who used axes actually died while trying to pull their weapon out. It's like the medieval version of your phone. Dying at 99%. Super. Frustrating and possibly deadly. Now let's talk about spears. Spears were the most commonly used weapon in medieval battles. In some armies, up to 70% of soldiers carried them. Why? They were cheap to make and easy to use. All you needed was a long wooden stick with a metal point. Even small kingdoms with few resources could make a lot of them. The biggest advantage of a spear was its reach. You could stab someone from about 6 feet away, before they even got close enough to swing at you. But spears also had problems. In tight battle formations, they became difficult to use and sometimes even dangerous. Records show that many soldiers got hurt by their own side's spears. In fact, more men got poked by their friends than by enemies. Painful way to learn the importance of watching your back. Maces were another powerful weapon that solved a different problem. Plate armor. As armor got better, swords became less useful. You couldn't slice through strong metal, but you could crush it. It didn't need to cut, it just needed to hit hard. Interestingly, many religious knights preferred maces because they didn't spill blood, so they believed it didn't break church rules. That's medieval logic for you. I can't cut you open, but I can smash your body, and that's totally fine. These weapons could turn your insides into pudding, but somehow that was considered okay by religious standards. Now let's talk about swords. In movies, swords get all the fame, but on real medieval battlefields, they were actually the least used weapon. Why? Because they were very expensive. A good sword could cost as much as a small house. It needed special steel, expert blacksmiths, and lots of training to use properly. That's why only rich people and professional fighters usually had them. And even though they looked impressive, swords broke a lot. Studies of old swords show that many were repaired multiple times before they were used for the last time. Nothing ruins your big heroic moment like your fancy sword breaking on the first hit, leaving you with an expensive metal stick. Then there were the improvised weapons, stuff poor soldiers had to use when real weapons weren't available. Farm tools became tools of war. Things like flails, pitchforks, grain beaters, and even sharpened shovels were used in battle. Records from major battles show that around 20% of common fighters used farm equipment turned into weapons. Surprisingly, they often worked pretty well. No one expects to be taken down by a garden tool. Dying from a shovel hit isn't legendary, but it gets the job done, and it's probably more embarrassing to explain in the afterlife. Weapon quality also varied a lot. While kings and nobles had beautiful, strong weapons, most regular soldiers used cheap, mass-made ones. Rusty blades, loose handles, and weak metal were common. Many of these weapons broke during battle, leaving fighters panicking and unarmed. As these rough weapons hit their targets, medieval soldiers quickly found out that wearing armor didn't make them unbeatable. It just made it harder to run away. And the injuries caused by these weapons were truly horrifying. These tools weren't made to look cool. They were made to destroy the human body, and they did just that. Armor gave some protection, but not as much as people think. Chainmail could stop a sword slash once or maybe twice. But if an axe or mace hit you directly, the metal rings would bend and press into your skin, becoming part of the injury. Notes from battlefield doctors show that around 40% of injured knights had broken bones, even though their armor wasn't broken. Armor worked like medieval bubble wrap. It might protect you from the first hit, but after that, it just crunched while your bones broke underneath. A hit to your shoulder could tear your whole arm off. Medieval weapons didn't give clean cuts. They ripped, crushed, and mangled flesh. Most fighters who lost an arm or leg didn't die right away. They died later from bleeding or infection. Blood loss was quick, much faster than in movies. The human body has around 10 pints of blood, and losing just 2 can knock you out. Reports say many soldiers died in under 5 minutes after being badly wounded. Sometimes, you didn't even realize. You were hurt until your vision went blurry and your legs collapsed. Injuries from heavy weapons were often worse than cuts. There was nothing to stitch. Just deep, painful damage inside your body. A strong hit from a mace might not cut the skin, but it could break ribs, damage organs, or cause bleeding in the brain. Medieval doctors had a funny but serious name for these hidden injuries. They called it the "oh no, he was fine a minute ago" syndrome. Not all wounds were big or obvious. Teeth could fly out when helmets were hit hard. Eyes could get hurt by sharp pieces from broken shields. Small cuts that today would only need a few stitches often became deadly because of infections. Records from monastery hospitals show that for every soldier who died in battle, 3 more died later from infected wounds. There were no medics on the battlefield. The closest help was other soldiers, tying belts tied around wounded arms or legs to stop bleeding or burning wounds with hot dagger tips. Pain was either, "I can still fight," or "please just kill me now." Not much in between. Field hospitals, when they existed, were just tents where injured soldiers lay on straw. Surgical tools were not clean or sterilized, maybe wiped on a cloth if lucky. Surgery on the battlefield worked only about 30% of the time. And most of the time, doctors just cut off limbs because it was faster. Not always because it was necessary. The mental pain from these injuries was often as bad as the physical pain. Many survivors said their minds felt broken during battle, especially after seeing or going through horrible injuries. As the fight went on, your mind would start to play tricks on you. Fighting in a medieval battle wasn't just about being strong. It was a mental nightmare that very few were ready for. As the battle went on, something strange happened to the soldiers' minds. Training couldn't stop it, and bravery couldn't beat it. Many fighters began asking themselves, "Where am I?" After just 10 minutes of fighting. The constant moving, turning to face attacks from all sides, and not being able to see clearly made many soldiers lose their sense of direction. Without radios or ways to talk easily, groups of soldiers got separated and confused. Studies show that about 60% of medieval soldiers didn't know which way they were facing after the first clash. This is why some battles ended with both sides running away from each other by mistake. Like a deadly game of you go first. It became very hard to tell who was a friend and who was an enemy. Armies usually wore colors or signs to show which side they were on, but these quickly got covered in mud, blood, and dust. Many fighters said it felt strange to be covered in blood, but still not hurt. Some didn't even notice serious wounds until they started feeling weak from losing blood. They kept asking themselves, should I attack now or just keep dodging? As the fight went on, making decisions became almost automatic. The mind couldn't think fast enough to plan moves, so soldiers just used what their body remembered from training. Like a dance your body knows, even if your mind is blank. Survivors often said they didn't remember what they did in battle. Their body fought while their mind was somewhere else. It's like when you drive home, but don't remember the last 10 minutes only in battle. You might have hit or stabbed people without realizing it. The brain isn't made to handle this kind of stress. Fear, anger, and confusion took control, leaving no space for smart thinking. Modern science shows that when people are under extreme danger, the part of the brain that thinks clearly shuts down. And only basic survival instincts work. For medieval fighters, this meant their careful plans were gone after a few minutes. They just started hitting anything that moved, not people. When tired and stressed, their vision narrowed like a tunnel. Instead of seeing whole people, they only saw quick movements or shapes. It didn't matter if it was a friend or enemy anymore. In this state, if something moved toward you, you just hit it. Survivors of medieval battles often described feeling strange. Like other humans, stopped looking like people and became just dangers or obstacles. After a while, the body acted on its own and thoughts became nothing but white noise. Today, combat experts call this the battle mind. A state where you act before you even think. Fighters said they felt like they were watching themselves fight from far away. Time could feel very slow or very fast. Some said minutes felt like hours. Or hours passed in just moments. This confusion made the battle even more chaotic. When the stress became too much, many soldiers chose something that made sense. They ran away. History books praised last stands, and movies show brave soldiers fighting until death. But most medieval soldiers were practical. Battlefield records say about 40% of armies ran away before the fight got really bad. Ordinary soldiers did not feel ashamed. The shame was for nobles and knights who had to protect their honor. Peasants lived by the rule. I want to see my family again. They had a saying, "The graveyard is full of heroes. The tavern is full of runners." Battles often ended because one side panicked first. Once a few ran, it caused others to run too. At the Battle of Hastings, Saxon soldiers broke ranks, ran away, came back, and fought again before the final end. Fighters sometimes pretended to be dead, faked injuries, or begged for mercy when trapped. Some hid behind horses or wagons. One French soldier even survived by crawling inside a dead horse for hours. Not exactly the heroic story you'd want to tell later. Running away was risky too. Fellow soldiers might kill you for deserting, and running in heavy armor was very tiring. Many knights got caught just because they ran out of breath after a short distance. Those who did manage to escape found that victory wasn't about glory at all. In war movies, victory looks like cheering soldiers, waving flags and heroic speeches. But medieval battles were nothing like that. If you were still standing when the fight ended, that meant you won. That was the only way to win. Just staying alive. There was no big ceremony, no medals. Just relief that you weren't dead yet. It was like the deadliest game of musical chairs. When the fighting stopped, whoever was still standing got to live. There was no loud cheering. Most survivors were too tired, hurt, or shocked to celebrate. Battlefields after fights were quiet, with soldiers sitting down wherever they were, too exhausted to talk. The victory cheer wasn't hurrah, but more like, thank God it's over. Does anyone have water? And maybe hoping for clean pants without someone else's blood on them. After the battle, the focus was on practical things. You wiped blood off your face, hopefully not your own, and checked for injuries you hadn't noticed before. You looked for your friends and gathered any usable weapons from the ground. Medieval post-battle checklists were simple. Are your arms still attached? Are your legs still working? Some friends were missing, and many enemies were missing too. Overall, a good day. The battlefield quickly turned into a grim marketplace. Valuable armor was stripped from the dead, no matter which side they fought for. Even boots were taken if they looked better than yours. Medieval recycling was way ahead of its time. Nothing was wasted, especially if it was shiny or still sharp. To celebrate, soldiers drank whatever alcohol was available to numb their physical and mental pain. One English writer noted that after a big battle, men drank for 3 days straight, as if trying to drown the horrors they had seen in cups of ale. Medieval victory parties were less like, "We are the champions," and more like, "Please help me forget everything." With the help of strong drinks, medical tents filled up with wounded soldiers. Field hospitals had a mortality rate between 25% and 50%. Medieval hospital waiting rooms had just 2 categories. Might live and probably won't. Your chances often depended on whether the surgeon had gotten enough sleep the night before. The physical effects lasted for days. Bruises showed up in places you didn't remember getting hit. Sleeping was hard, often broken by sudden pain or nightmares.